Next up, we have a bit of a change of pace with Megumi Rescue. That means Fire Brigade Rescue. Note the credit to ICOM and the reprogrammed game copyrighted to Sega credit. Generally, this appears on games that were ported from another system, implying that this originally appeared on a different platform. It certainly feels like an old-school arcade game, but if this was originally an arcade title, I've never heard of it. It does bear a lot of similarity to a Western computer game called Rescue Squad, which was from Muse, the same guys who did the first Castlevania game. But there's no real connection between that game and this one. It's probably just a coincidence or a case of inspiration. So anyway, Megumi Rescue is another game in the old Breakout Kaboom tradition. It uses the Master System rotary paddle controller to move the firefighters on the ground. This will bounce up one of your firefighters in the air. The object is to grab onto a window. If the window is occupied by a person, then you grab a hold of them and jump down and rescue them. And of course, you need to catch the people when they land. Occasionally you'll find objects other than people in the windows, such as the helicopter, which seems to automatically complete the level for you. It even gives you access to a silly little bonus round where you try to catch falling objects. After this, you move on to another building. I believe there are 30 buildings in all, and each are unique in terms of design and layout. There's all kinds of things to find in the buildings that'll give you extra points. Money, safes full of valuables. There's a gold key which unleashes a torrent of water onto the building, thus apparently saving everyone. According to a review I read of this game, there's an object which will quote-unquote nuke the building, thus ending the level. I'm not sure if this refers to the helicopter or something else. What looks like a bomb is shot into the building at the end of each level, for example when the helicopter finishes a level for you. I'm not sure if that's what the reviewer was referring to, or if there actually is some kind of nuclear device which I haven't found. You're also up against a time limit as the fire spreads and people start jumping. You yourself can catch on fire and die, of course. Also landing on the hard concrete will kill you. So it's a pretty fun game. Despite its simplicity, it's actually a pretty neat idea for a Kaboom clone. And the last game of July is another arcade port, Thunderblade. This does not have a very good reputation nowadays, and for good reason, as we'll see. We've seen a handful of shoot-'em-ups on the Master System, but nothing too terribly exciting. Thunderblade isn't going to change that because it's actually pretty subpar. See, here's the thing. The arcade game was the latest in Sega's series of 3D superscaler games. They were often found in those super awesome deluxe cabinets. But even when you played on a regular cabinet, Thunderblade was really cool because it had this very impressive sprite-based 3D effect. It used stacked sprites to make passing buildings look like they were actually in 3D. It alternated between these sort of top-down and first-person viewpoints. You had enemies flying towards you, missiles shooting everywhere, huge explosions. Like so many other of Sega's arcade games, it was technically very impressive. And the Master System version? Well, no, not so much. Obviously all the stacked sprites and 3D effects have been pretty much removed. Your helicopter can no longer change its altitude. You have two weapons, a machine gun and missiles, which are used to take out surface enemies, and both are incredibly boring looking. So it boils down to being like a repetitive and dull shoot-'em-up. First-person sections look maybe a little nicer, but still some rather crude attempts were made in trying to replicate the look of the arcade game. Still, the first-person levels are pretty boring. Most aircraft just line up to be shot and then fly away harmlessly. Alternately, when you're dealing with the tanks, they shoot these projectiles that fly around like weird curved paths and are very hard to dodge. You have to move all over trying to survive. Here's this rather boring boss battle where you fly over an aircraft and then shoot it down. Or maybe it's a missile or something, I'm really not sure. So Thunderblade is stuck in a no man's land. Sega couldn't replicate the arcade game's visual excitement, and they chose not to add anything that might make the console version fun, like interesting enemies or power-ups. so it's both boring and frustrating at the same time. It's rather another failed attempt by Sega to bring one of their arcade games into the home. Alright, let's switch gears for a second here and examine a few more non-Japanese releases. Games that were released only in the Americas or Europe. We'll start with Rastan, which I think was released in the US in the second half of 1988. Rastan is a classic sword and sorcery type game, much like Lord of Sword, only more fun. Oh look, I got a piece of armor here. They're randomly dropped, they add to your defense. The object is pretty simple: swing your sword, walk forward, and kill everything that moves. Rastan, like Bubble Bobble, was a Taito arcade game. Its protagonist was clearly based on Conan the Barbarian, and the game was naturally pretty violent. Enemies would explode in fountains of gore when killed. Unlike Arthur from Ghosts and Goblins, Rastan was a rugged dude, with a life bar represented by a realistic-looking human heart. A fun game, and one that made its way to the Master System with all the blood intact. But the game has been changed quite a bit, much less fast-paced with fewer enemies. In other words, it's gone from being a quarter gobbler to a more console-friendly game. There are 7 levels, each starts outdoors, and then move on to a castle of some sort, then a boss battle. Here's the first boss right here, some sort of half-monster, half-horse dude. None of the bosses are too terribly difficult to kill. Now in Rastan you'll encounter a constant stream of enemies, but those aren't really your biggest problem. No, that would be the environment. Rastan is very vulnerable to bodies of water, and his jump is a bit difficult to control, and that means you'll land in the water a lot. Furthermore, inside the castle there's quite a few lava pits and moving spikes and that sort of thing. Some jumping challenges seem more suited for Mega Man than for the big bulky Rastan. His high jump, which is activated by pressing the upper diagonals on the D-pad, is a bit tricky to pull off, and I found myself falling on spikes pretty frequently. Even worse, you can't control Rastan in mid-jump, making moments like this a little unfair. If you try to jump and land on one of those platforms, you'll just sail right over. From what I can tell, you simply can't land on him when you're in the water. To add insult to injury, Rastan freezes for a second whenever he takes damage. Fortunately, you do have a wall bounce move to help you in situations like this, but for me at least, it always felt like I was sort of struggling a bit with the controls, something you never experience in a Mario or a Mega Man game. As I mentioned, bosses are usually not that tough. Your best friend for many of these encounters is a downward sword thrust used in mid-jump. It's actually pretty similar to the attack Link had in Zelda 2. As the game progresses, you'll pass through a number of different environments: mountains, forests, fiery volcanoes. The volcano level has the best boss, a huge red multi-sprite dragon. You need to kill this guy by hitting him on the head, common theme for most of Rastan's bosses. Now things get a little sadistic in the last level, which is like a labyrinth-style castle. Then you finally get to the last boss, which is a smaller red dragon. It's actually a bit disappointing. They should have placed this guy in the second to last dungeon and then used the big dragon as the final boss, but oh well. So after taking care of the last boss, you get a little epilogue that sort of tells you that Rastan was rescuing a princess. Well, that's original. This is actually a completely different story than the arcade game, by the way. Though, in an unusual touch, Rastan, I guess suffering from some sort of low self-esteem, slinks away from the princess who loves him, since he doesn't deserve her. Oh yeah, and take a look, the name of the kingdom is Chamois, or maybe that's Chamois. So I'd call Rastan a pretty successful arcade conversion. Certainly it's superior to most of Sega's similar efforts, or Rygar for the Master System. Rastan's clumsy jumping results in most of the frustration, but there aren't any really terrible situations that you can't live with, so it's definitely worth your time. Here's our third US and Europe only game. It's Shanghai, a game we've seen before. However, I think this is the only version to have an animated title screen, and you finally get to find out which of those two guys wins the game. It seems Sega was responsible for this ported version, the umpteenth port of this old computer classic. It's also got in-game instructions, very nice. And this is one mellow jam. I could totally listen to this music on a rainy day. So yeah, this is the third time we've seen Shanghai. It already turned up in Chrontendo Episode 29 and Chron Turbo Episode 1. It was a launch game for the PC Engine in Japan. Which means that, yes, Shanghai is the first game to be released on all three platforms, Master System, Famicom, and PC Engine. Not many games get that honor. Another one that springs to mind is Falcom's Ease. So we all know how to play this game, right? You select a matching pair of tiles to remove them. The object is to clear all the tiles. As usual, there's quite a few menu options. Like, is that music breaking your concentration? Then change it. You can even turn it off completely. You can also reverse moves, use various cheats, or hints, if you want to call them that. Naturally, I got stuck with no more possible moves. So is this as good as the PC Engine version? Well, maybe. The PC Engine Shanghai has easier to read tiles, so I guess the prize goes to Hudson.